Hello there. Welcome to the Yet to Be Named podcast. My name is Brian Childers, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Keith. How you doing, Chad?
Hello. Great. How are you?
Doing good. So this is our first episode, maybe not even real episodes. Why don't you go ahead and just give us the outline of what we're doing here, what the podcast is going to be about?
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about, I like to study psychology on a small level, and I'm definitely an extrovert. I love people, I like being around people. I re-energize around people. And my wife, on the other hand, is more of an introverted person. And so I've noticed in the neighborhood, she's the first one to reach out to the new neighbors, go out, shake a hand of somebody she's never met before. But she, and that seems like a trait of an extrovert, but actually it takes a lot of energy out of her to do that. So she'll go and do the introduction, then she kind of wants to go back in and sit on the couch for a while without the kids around. But me, I'm a little bit slower to meet brand new people, but once I meet them, I like the deep conversations. And I really think that everybody has a unique story. Everybody you come across has potentially a crazy story. So with this podcast, we hope to kind of meet some people I find are interesting. And of course, we do technology, and if we can kind of tie that in, some of these people that we hope to interview and such have technology backgrounds or use technology. Britt, the guy that's here with us today, which Brian will intro in a minute, we support their Macs here, and we want to kind of hear his story. But yeah, that's the hope, is just to talk about people and their stories and people that we find interesting, whether they do technology or not, just artists and fun people. So
yeah, and I am definitely an introverted person myself, but I also really like these conversations and getting to know people on a closer level, Yeah. So that being said, we do have a guest here in studio, Britt Nipper, production manager at Life Church Charlotte. So we're going to jump into his story. So Chad, if you want to walk us through just kind of how you know Britt, and then we'll kind of dig into the dirt here.
Yeah. So I was thinking about how long I've known Britt, and it's probably been 20 years, which is crazy to think about. Like, I was in high school, I think. And again, I was thinking earlier about the CD that my brother bought. The first CD was Melancholy, Infinite Sadness. I need to look up how many years, but I think we're on year 25. And it's funny to see, gone are the days of the double disc record. Where you've got two CDs. Now we're like one and done.
I always hated the two CDs because it never failed that one of the holders wouldn't hold as well, and so one of the CDs would just fall out and rattle around in the case and get scratched. And
yeah, so that album was released in 1995.
Oh, wow.
So that's 24 years, if my math's right.
That's amazing. So yeah, Britt and I have known each other, been through a lot of up and downs, and at one point, and I'm sure Britt will talk about this briefly, is that Britt was our band manager back in my previous life. So, without further ado, we'll talk to Britt and just kind of, Britt, why don't you just start and tell us your story? How did you get to Life Charlotte, which, by the way, Life Fellowship is my home church. Love the place. I've been here for 6 years. And it's awesome to see Britt circle back around through my life and be here as a production manager and get to rub shoulders with him more often. So, yeah, Britt, why don't you, give us your story here?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's been cool. It's been... we probably had like a 6 year or so gap, maybe, that I didn't really see you hardly at all. And then I ended up at Life Fellowship and we reconnected, and it has been awesome getting to hang out.
Yeah.
You play in the band here. I am the production manager, as Brian said. So I guess we'll Tarantino this thing, and I'll start at the end and then go back to the beginning if that works for you guys.
Perfect.
So I am the production manager here at Life Fellowship. I've been full-time on staff for a little over a year. I've been part-time for about 2.5 years before that. So I knew our worship arts pastor here, Jason Lanier. We were at a previous church together. I was in the drama ministry there, and he was the worship pastor at this other church. And we reconnected here at Life Fellowship. I went out and grabbed lunch with him. I actually saw that he was at this church when me and my wife were looking for a new church, and we had no intention on staying here. We were just coming to visit it, just to say hello to.
Funny how that works.
I know, right?
Did you know Jason prior? Did you actually know him? Because when I came on, Jason approached me, but he only knew me through like social media channels. I don't think we'd ever actually worked together. So did you know him before?
So we worked together in the capacity that he was over the entire worship department. I was in the drama ministry.
Oh,
and
gotcha.
so as we would come out and do rehearsals for the morning service, you know, he knew me as an actor in his ministry. We never really went out to lunch. We didn't have a deep relationship. We knew of each other and knew of each other's talents and abilities. And so that's our relationship before. But anyway, so we went out and grabbed some lunch just to catch up. I told him, I wasn't acting anymore, which I'll get into a little more later. I'd actually moved behind the camera and started producing videos, filming, directing things. And so he was intrigued by that, wanted me to come on, see if I would volunteer and help out, which I did here at Life Fellowship for a little while. And then one lunch, he said he was in need of a production manager. We were going to be moving out of a temporary space into a permanent space, and he needed a production manager. And he asked me if I would be willing to do that. And my first thought was no. That sounds absolutely miserable. No, I didn't think it sounded miserable. It was just like, it's production manager. I've always wanted to be out in front of people, in front of the camera on stage. And now you're asking me to be
the complete opposite.
Exactly. So, and I didn't even know what I'd be doing, managing this production. It's interesting. God has thrown me into leadership positions, whether it's as a husband or now as a production manager, when I've never seen myself as a leader. It's just not something I've been comfortable with ever. And so I've been thrust into these positions that make me uncomfortable, and it's forced me to learn, read some books, get some new material, sit down with some guys who are in leadership positions and just kind of be trained and learn from them on how to be a leader, because it's not always easy being a leader.
No.
And I still honestly don't think of myself as one, even though I technically am one, and I lead. Probably
a good sign.
I lead a team of 30 plus people. Actually, a lot more than that. It's 25 to 30 on a Sunday morning, and then we have bigger teams than that here. So anyway, all that being said, I ended up coming on board part time as a production manager, and ended up turning into a full time position, leading our production and worship teams here, and also I still do video production here as well at the church.
Cool. Awesome. So take us back in time, or do the Tarantino. So what was prior to that? All
right. So if you're riding in your car on like a long 5-hour trip, get ready. This is going to take up. No, it is a long. It's a long story of how I got to where I am now, and definitely one that has changed over time. So I won't go into every little detail of it, just to bore people. But so I had always dreamed of being an actor. That's what I wanted. Even when I first met you, that's what I was doing. You knew that I was all in with the acting thing.
Yeah.
And I actually trace it back to 6th grade at Huntersville First Baptist Church. I was a wise man in a play, Christmas play, and I had one line to say, and it was the most exhilarating thing I had ever done in my entire life. Wow. I knew I wanted to be
adrenaline rushing.
Yeah, absolutely. There was just something about it that I loved. So from then on, I've done, I did theater in middle school. I did it in high school. I was in all the plays. On and on and on. That's what I was going to do. I even set my life up to, once I got out of high school, I just took professional acting classes and trained and studied. Didn't go the college route. So that was my goal. That was what I was going to do. Nothing was going to stand in the way. I didn't even have a plan B, because I always lived under the assumption that if you have a plan B, you're going to fall back to it. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want a plan B, which I know a lot of people listening right now, it's just so stupid. Always have a plan B. You never know what's going to happen. But yeah. I was dead set that it was, this was what was going to happen. So out of high school, I had an agent, and they actually did, it was a few years out of high school, they did a showcase where they invited agencies in from LA, New York. There were, I think, even a couple from London. And so they came in. It was actually in the Asheville area. I went up and did this audition. And so you had to do a monologue, you had to do a film scene, and a commercial for all of these agents. And so the point behind it was, you got up in front, I think there was 25 that were there. You got up in front of all of them. They watched you, and at the end, they would let you know if they wanted to talk to you more or not. So leading up into this, I was in constant prayer of, God, this is what I want. And this is what I've always wanted. But I don't want to do anything outside of what you want for me. I was very cognizant of that, because I always had the idea, even though I did want to be an actor, I knew at some point I would have to compromise, isn't the right word, but compromise a few of, maybe some of what I've felt to make it, I was comfortable doing that because I could separate me, the actor, versus me, the person. Because they, in my mind, they were two different things. And I can see the argument that they are still two different things. Me on screen is different than me in person. And that's what I could separate early on. But I thought, God, if this is what you want, let this audition go well. Let things happen from here. And you know, it's just all in your hands. So I was just in constant prayer about that. So fast forward a little bit, we get to this audition, and I did my scenes. Everything went great. And out of the 20, 25 agents that were there, I had about 18 of them call me back saying they wanted to see me.
Oh,
so huge chunk of them.
Sounds good. Yeah.
I ended up actually signing with an agent out in LA and a manager. So I had an agent and a manager in LA. I'm SAG eligible, which is the Screen Actors Guild. It's the actors union. And one of the reasons why these agents were looking at me is because I was SAG eligible. That's a huge deal to a lot of them. So if you don't have this eligibility, they don't even want to touch you. And SAG eligibility, a quick, easy way to explain it, it's kind of like credit. You have to have credit to get credit, but you can't get credit unless you have credit. So to be SAG eligible, you have to be in a SAG eligible production, but normally you can't get in a SAG eligible production unless you're SAG. So I had the eligibility. I ended up with an agent and manager in LA, and this is something that people who live in LA for 20, 30 years never have. They just don't get it. It's you can't just walk out to LA, knock on an agent's door, and, hey, let me audition for you. It doesn't happen. It's not that easy. So here I am, early 20s. I have an agent, have a manager in LA, SAG eligible. I pack up my car and drive across the country with my brother. I'm moving out to LA. He wanted to go out there on a trip with me, just to hang out, cross country trip. He wouldn't want that. He was going to help me move in and settle. So we drive out there, we hang out, stop at the Grand Canyon, stop by Vegas, have a little bit of fun on the way out there. And so we get to LA, and this is kind of interesting. I've told this story to a good number of people over the years. I haven't really told it to a broad audience before.
Well, this is a huge audience right now. So
yeah. As of now, this is all that's listening to the podcast, right? The people that are in this room.
Yeah.
No, and I'm excited to share more with people and with more people. So we get out to LA, and so let me back up just a little bit. So I'm trying to think through, not to bore this audience with every little detail, but there's a lot of details that if they're missing, the story doesn't really work or make sense.
Details matter.
Yeah.
So before I went out to LA, before I moved out there, I had gotten really sick, and insurance ended up not covering a lot of it. And so we had a lot of medical bills, all this other stuff that just wrecked my credit. So I had no chance of getting an apartment out there on my own. So actually in between that audition and me moving to LA, I actually I flew out with my parents. They were going to help me co-sign on an apartment just so I could get in one out there. And so we found a little apartment up in the Van Nuys area. I know that seems like an odd detail, but it comes back into play later. So so anyway, packed everything up, moved out there with my brother. I get out there, and we start moving everything into the apartment. And I remember it was like really hot that day, really, really hot. I was sweating. Me and my brother moved everything upstairs. I had this little studio apartment where you could like fry eggs and go to the bathroom at the same time, which is the actor's life. That's what, that's what you always hear. The poor struggling actor. I was going to wait tables and be in LA. So we're moving everything in, and we're almost finished. And I walk out of the apartment, and the lady across the hall from me steps out of the apartment, and she goes, "Are you just now moving in?" And I said, "Yeah, I am." And she goes, "Well, good luck," and turned and started walking down the hall. And the way she said that wasn't like a happy good luck, hey, great to have you here. It was like you're screwed kind of thing.
Oh, well.
So I immediately said, whoa, what do you mean by good luck? And she said, well, this apartment is garbage. Like the fat man downstairs, she was talking about the guy that manages the place. She's like, he does not take care of this place at all. We find roaches everywhere, and they don't repair the building. If there's an earthquake, they just plaster over the cracks. And she's like, it's falling apart. And she said, so just letting you know that. And I said, well, thank you for telling me. And so she turned and walked away. And I walked back inside to my brother. He was in there, and I was like, that was very odd. But then I brushed it off as, I know I'm living in a horrible, terrible apartment in the middle of Van Nuys. It wasn't nice at all. I couldn't afford any more than that being in LA. It's expensive out there. So we finished unloading a little bit, and then we were downstairs unpacking the car, and this lady walks back over to me, and she goes, "I feel like there's more I need to tell you." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Never met this woman before." You were talking about being an introvert before. Yeah, I've read a few articles about, the introvert extrovert line. Like, I can be extroverted, but it does drain me for a while. I do enjoy it for a little while, but then so just talking to new people sometimes makes me nervous. So she says, I say, "What's that?" And she said that the whole area is bad, and that prostitutes are using people's apartments for their business. So they're like they're climbing up the balconies, breaking in people's apartments, doing their thing, and leaving. And she said, it's just a really bad place to live. And I said, "Well, if it's so bad, why are you still living here?" And she said, "I'm actually moving out next month when my lease runs out." And she said, I'm just letting you know, it's just not safe being here. And I feel like you should know this. Complete stranger. So we go back upstairs. We're sitting in the apartment, and I remember vividly, I lay my head on a bag, again, hot, sweating. And, I grew up a believer, kind of like you, Chad, and a family of believers. But yet we didn't really openly talk about it a lot, So for me and my brother to have a conversation is a little odd. Not that it's out of left field at all, but so I sat there with him, and my brother was going back to school at this point, actually heading for a seminary degree. And so I looked at him and I was like, why would God put that lady in my way to say that stuff to me? Or is that just the devil trying to stop me because he knows I'm out here to be a believer in this industry that he owns? I was like, why would that even be put in my way? I was prayed up. God let everything happen in line. I got the audition, didn't have any problems. I have an agent, I have a manager. God gave me all that stuff. So why would that be put in my way? And I said, or it's just something that I need to battle and get through and move on. And so my brother was like, I don't know. So we went out, hung out. He wanted to see LA. He was going to stay with me for a couple of days. We went out, kind of saw some sights, came back. And it's actually funny, that night, we set our alarms for like 2 a.m. to wake up and look out the window as if we were going to see like prostitutes crawling around in the streets everywhere, just to check, see what was going on. So the next day we were getting up to go out and head to Santa Monica, do some other LA stuff. And I was on the phone with a girl I was dating at the time. And as clear as day, and trust me, I know if I was listening to this podcast in my car or at home, I would think for a second, whatever, dude, that didn't happen. You're ridiculous. So I'm with you. I'm with you when I say what I'm about to say. I understand you're going to think I'm crazy. I promise this happened as clear as day. I was looking out the window. I closed the blind, hung up the phone. I had an old Razor phone, so it flapped back together. And as I turn around, you can't see me on a podcast. I have chills in my arms. As I was turning around to say something to my brother, I heard a voice. Clearly, it was not audible in the room because my brother didn't hear it. So I felt it and experienced, and I heard it. But it said, "You're not safe." And it was as if God said, "This is God speaking to you." He prefaced it by, he didn't say that, but I knew what it was. I felt, "You're not safe."
Wow.
So I didn't say anything to my brother. We ended up going out and just kind of hanging out. And of course, that's just ringing in my head the whole time. Like, what was that? What in the world just happened? And so even my brother noticed throughout the day that I was just kind of numb. And I felt it. I felt emotionally, physically, spiritually numb. Like I was where I wanted to be. It was a beautiful day. I'm in LA. I had dreamed of it for years and years and years. And here I am. I'm right where I want to be. And so I started thinking through a little more about what that could mean. And I was like, well, maybe it's just the apartment. Maybe the apartment's not safe and I need to get out. And so I didn't tell my parents that. I didn't tell my brother any of that. I just told them I talked to my parents about what the lady had said about the apartment not being safe, and I told them I feel like I probably need to move out. So my parents said, hey, while your brother's there, why don't you guys take a look around this afternoon, see if you can find a safer apartment. And, if we need to help cover a little bit for a month or two to get you on your feet, we'll see what we can do. We don't want you to be somewhere that's not safe. So I was like, okay, that lightened my spirits a little bit. Me and my brother kind of looked at a couple spots. We found a few that may work, came back, went to sleep. The next morning we woke up and I'm in the shower and I have my hands on my head, scrubbing soap in my hair, and the exact same voice, plain as day, said, you're not safe in this city. You're not safe in this city is what I experienced and heard. And so I hopped out of the shower, dried off as quick as I could, went out to my brother and was like, all right, here's what's going on.
Let's go.
And I said to him, and I was angry at him at the time. Like, I was frustrated, not angry. I was frustrated with him at the time. But now looking back, he was the best person to have in that situation in my life at that time, because I asked what I should do. As a younger brother looking up to an older brother, what should I do? Should I stay here? Should I go? What should I do? And he said, this has been your dream. You think you're experiencing something right now. You need to figure that out. I cannot give you an answer at all. You have to figure this out. So I called my parents. I told them everything as well. I actually sent some emails to a few people. Jason was one of them. Funny enough, I'm back with him now. Just a few people in my life to say, hey, here's what's happened. And so me and my brother still went out. Again, I just felt so numb, and I was starting to kind of come to the realization that I was going to need to probably leave, but I still didn't want to. I was in LA. I was where I wanted to be. And so Dad had called the apartment complex. Again, the reason why I went back earlier to let you know my parents had come out there. I was early 20s at the time. But anyway, so Dad had been talking with the current apartment complex that I was living in. And he called them to say, hey, look, you kind of misled us. This apartment doesn't seem to be as nice as you made it out to be. What do we need to do to get Britt out of the lease? And so he said, I'm sure you probably won't let us out of the lease completely, but is there any way we can get it moved to 6 months? And Dad's like, hey, if you have to stay out there for 6 months, it is what it is. And then later that evening, Dad had called back and he said, I actually asked them what it would take to get you out of the lease completely. He said, I don't know where you're going to go, what apartment you're going to go to. They're still under the assumption that I'm staying out there. And I kind of was too. I wanted to. I knew I probably couldn't or shouldn't, but I wanted to stay out there. And so that night I fell asleep, and I'm probably prayed this 500 times. I just repeated, God, I know you don't give answers right away always, but I need a specific answer right now. And I said, only one of two things can happen, and I'm going to take whichever one happens as you continually guiding me through this process. Number one is I've misinterpreted what I've felt and heard, and you keep me in this lease, which forces me to stay here. Because I'm not going to leave an apartment we're paying for. I've wanted to be in LA. Force me to stay here if you want me to stay here. If you don't want me here, if I'm hearing and experiencing what I feel like I'm hearing and experiencing, then get me out of this lease somehow. I don't know how that's going to happen, but somehow get me out of this lease and I'll go home. So I woke up the next morning to my phone ringing, Dad calling, and he goes, hey, just got off the phone with the apartment complex, and they said they're letting you completely out of the lease. And we're not even on the hook to pay anything. No penalties, no nothing.
Whoa.
They're just 100% cutting ties with us as if you were never even in the apartment.
Well, that's pretty clear.
Yeah. So we packed, my brother helped me pack everything up. He was actually flying out that very day to get home. He had an exam to take. So either way, whether I stayed or not, he was flying out. So we packed everything up, I dropped him at the airport, and I always look back and laugh at God's ability to just, I don't know what I want to say here. I drove back from the airport, and getting from the airport back to get home, I had to drive past the Hollywood sign, and I started bawling my eyes out.
Man.
It was like, here I am, my car loaded up 5 days later, I don't remember the exact time frame, just days later from getting to where I had dreamt of being, where I felt God led me to, where I felt like everything fell into place for me to get out there, only for this random, you're not safe in this city to happen. So I spent 3 days in the car by myself, crying, yelling at God, angry at times, really seriously questioning what in the world was happening. Why was I driving away from my dream? I had it. I was set,
Yeah.
So I came back, and of course, Chad said we've known each other for a long time. So I came back from this and to questions from, this group of friends that I had of like, man, what do you think's happening? I wonder if there's going to be like a massive earthquake and, God got you out of there. That'd be awesome. Or like a tsunami or something.
California's going to break off the planet.
Exactly. So, I had no clue why I came back, and I had no clue what I was doing with my life. I still had my agent here in Charlotte. They still sent me out on a few things when I came back. My desire and passion was still to just be an actor. That's all I wanted. That's the only thing I still wanted to do, even though I came back here. I felt like I made the right decision, but I didn't know why. I felt like I listened to God, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what the purpose was. So I ended up getting a job at O'Charlie's in Huntersville. Can we advertise for people like that?
Yeah, they have those yeast rolls, right?
Yeah,
they do. Yeah. So I ended up getting a job at O'Charlie's, and I went through the training process. And then the fourth night that I was trained by a girl named Emily. I hope she's okay that I say her name on the. I was trained by a girl named Emily, and I had been told leading up to my training with her that she is just the worst. She's mean. She's controlling. She's bossy. Like no one wants to be around this girl.
Wow. So you were excited about this job.
I couldn't wait. Yeah, I couldn't wait. So my fourth night came, and it's the night where you actually do all of the serving yourself with someone just following you at that point. And so she walks up to me and she goes, I'm training you tonight. Do you have any experience doing this? And I had like 5+ years of fine dining experience. But so she said, have you done this before? And I said, yeah, I've done it a little bit. She took her apron off, threw it at me, and said, don't screw anything up, and walked away. So before we get to the end of it, she's now my wife. So that's the first words that my wife ever said to me.
Don't screw it up. And she still says that
today. Every morning, right? When you leave the house, right?
Yes. Yeah. Have a good day, honey. Don't screw anything up today. That's good. So anyway, we could not have been any more different of people at this point. Here I am, not a perfect person by any stretch of the imagination, but I did grow up in the church. She did not grow up in the church. She unfortunately came from a broken home. If I were to make, and Chad can identify with this, if I were to have made a list of all the things that I deserved in a future wife that I told God that I had not done or done that he deserved to give me, she would not have been any of those things on that list. Like everything on that list was like, just check this. Like this is not someone I would ever have a desire to be with.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, two polar opposites. But over time, we started talking a little more. I made it a point that I was going to hang out at work after work with everybody. Because so normally in the restaurant industry, everybody gets done waiting tables. They all sit at the bar and drink and get wasted. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to intentionally sit with these people so that they can see that I'm different, so I can talk to them. And, once they get to a point where anything I say doesn't matter, I can go home at that point. So I hung out with everybody. Emily was there, of course. We were sitting there one night, and out of nowhere, another girl looks at me. And I don't know what made her do this. Again, it's just, I guess, God throughout this whole thing. But she looks over at me. She goes, Britt, are you a virgin? Out of nowhere. Asked me that question. And so I said, yeah, I am. And Emily's eyes were like the size of plates. They were huge. And she's like, you're a liar. There's no way. There's absolutely no way. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, I am. So I'd been in a relationship for a little while at that point, and she found it. She later told me she thought I was so attractive that there's no possible way that I wasn't. And I like to joke with her and say it was by choice. Anyway, so the next day, the reason why I bring that up, the next day she came up to me and asked why I was. And I said, well, it's part religious, it's part personal. Like personally, I like the idea of waiting for my wife, but I also, subscribe to certain religious beliefs that, that I want to stick to. And I wasn't always perfect with them, but So that opened the door to me and Emily to be able to talk about God and church and all of that stuff. And then so a few weeks later, I walk in to the kitchen with her standing there with 2 or 3 other people at the restaurant, and they're all laughing, and she's laughing about how the guy she's dating had cheated on her. And first of all, it just caught me off guard that you're laughing about something like that. And then second of all, I looked at her and there was something in her eyes that just, I saw some pain. And I don't know how I was able to see that. Again, God throughout all of this, but I saw pain there. And in the middle of all these people, knowing that this girl is like the worst of the worst, which is what everybody's told us, she's going to bite your head off at anything. I looked at her and I was like, why are you laughing about that? I said, she said, because it's kind of funny. And I was like, you don't look like you think it's funny. And she walked off. And about 15 minutes later, she came back to me and asked why I asked her that. And I said, I don't know. I said, I just saw some hurt and pain in your eyes. And she said, well, it's because there is. So again, that opened the door to us having conversation. We would close the restaurant together. And so I would have plenty of time. She just asked everything, tons and tons of questions. And it got to the point where she said, I love talking to you about all this stuff, but just don't ever invite me to come to church with you. Which, of course, meant I needed to invite her to come to church with me. We go hang out at Waffle House after, because it's the only place open when you close a restaurant at midnight. We'd go sit there and talk for a couple hours. I bought her a Bible, finally invited her to church, and we went on a Wednesday night. And the joke was with her, and I know other people make the joke too, the joke was, if I ever go to church, hell will freeze over. So we went on a Wednesday night in the wintertime, and we went to Hickory Grove. We walk in. What's interesting is I had been talking to her about, what Jesus had done for her, the veil being torn, all that stuff. And so that's what he preached on that night. And she kept like hitting me going, this is why you invited me, right? You knew he was going to talk about this. And I said, zero clue. I had no idea what he was going to talk about.
There's no menu.
yeah, exactly. But I was like, how cool is it that you're hearing more in depth of what I've already been talking to you about? So when we walked out of the church, about 3 inches of snow had fallen on the ground. There was no snow when we walked in. About 3 inches had fallen when we walked back out. And she was just like blown away. She's like, I told you hell would freeze over if I ever came to church. So through all that, just us talking, her coming to church with me, she finally made the decision on her own. It wasn't in a church setting. It happened before a church setting, but she made the decision to follow Jesus, to get saved, and which was incredible. And it was funny. She called me one night after we were leaving Waffle House driving home, and she goes, I don't want you to answer this question, but if I were to die tonight, and before she finished it, I was like, you would go to hell. And she goes, I told you not to say anything. I didn't want you to answer that question. So anyway, so through all of that, and I even went to lunch with a friend one time. I told him the story of me coming back from LA with Emily, and he goes, man, do you think that's why God brought you back? And I said, you know what? I've thought that a few times as well. And I said, it doesn't make sense with the safety thing, but maybe that's the only thing God could say to get me out of there. But I was like, I feel like she's a reason I came back, but I can't put all the pieces together yet. It just doesn't fully make sense yet. So, through all this time too, I wasn't interested in Emily, which was odd. Again, she didn't meet this criteria that I had told God I deserved. And so I thought she was attractive, but it never really went any further than that, because the attraction stopped whenever my mind would think through all the things that she had done. All the things that, Christ had redeemed her from and redeemed me from all of my sins, I couldn't look past.
Sure. That makes sense. I get it.
Yeah, good Christian guy, right?
Yeah, right. That's how we do it.
So anyway, I decided after all that had happened, I was like, this was probably a year and a half to 2 years after I came back from LA. I had the itch to go back to LA so bad. It was like, I was like, I need to go back. Like, I came back, I told her about Jesus. Awesome. I'm off to LA again. And the crazy thing is I called my agent and manager that I had in LA, and they both said they would love to have me back out there. Absolutely unheard of in LA. Like, once you're done with somebody, you're done with them.
Had you done anything in the meantime? Like,
I had done some stuff here, some, little local commercials, an independent film, I think at that time. So I'd still been doing some things, still been active, but the fact that they still were willing to take me back after all this time was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, cool. So maybe I did come back for Emily. Now I'm going back to LA. And so I ended up packing everything up and going back out to LA. And I actually had a lady that was with the agency here that I have. She actually moved to LA and had a little house that had a garage that she had turned into an apartment. So she let me rent it for dirt cheap. And so I got back out there, got reconnected with the agent manager, and I was out in LA for about a month and a half this time, almost 2 months. And I ended up getting a job at the ESPN Zone to wait tables right near Staples Center, setting up my life, because it was like, man, I did what I needed to do out there. I'm out here. And in all that time, I started there were 2 stories going on here. One of the stories was Emily, and then the other story was how my path would ultimately end up. So the Emily side of things, I actually did start to really develop feelings for her. She came out there and visited me for a week. But I really started to I love hanging out with this girl. She makes me laugh. We have a great time together. This is just a weird situation to be in, but I couldn't let go of her past. No matter what, I just couldn't. We talked on the phone. She thought when I left, we would talk on the phone like once a month, and we ended up talking every day on the phone.
Wow.
This is back before the minutes didn't start till after 9 p.m.
The free minutes.
Like the free minutes after 9 p.m.
Yeah.
So, but here I am waiting till 9 p.m. LA time to get free minutes, which means she was up till midnight on East Coast.
That says something right there.
Yeah, she had moved back to Atlanta to kind of get her life straightened out as well after her salvation came. And so anyway, we got off the phone a lot crying because I was just a total jerk to her. Like, I was not a good Christian guy by any stretch of the imagination, because what Christ had redeemed in her, I was throwing back in her face all the time. Like, you know what? I do think I'm starting to fall in love with you, but what about this? How about you make up for this? How about, why did you do this? Why did you do? It was almost like I was like, why did you do this to me? Even though I didn't know her. I had no idea who she was. And I was going to a church out there, Reality LA, fantastic church. Tim Chaddock is the pastor at the time I was out there. He's actually moved over to London, started Reality London over there. I still listen to his podcast, sermon podcast stuff. Fantastic speaker. He's a guy that kind of came out of the same, situation that Emily was in. But I was attending that church, and I was listening to one of his podcasts while I was out there, an old sermon, and he said that it was interesting, him and his wife was kind of like me and Emily at the time. He is somebody that came from a broken background. He says in one of his podcasts, he's talking about he paid for his first abortion when he was 15. So this guy had been through everything, and then he met someone and married a wife who was raised in a Christian home, and, as perfect can be, it seemed like, just to hear him talk. Of course, I know she had her faults too, but he asked her one day how she was able to get past all the stuff he had done in his life and move on. And she said, it's because I see you through the blood of Christ. Talk about a slap to the face.
Dig that in there, yeah.
Yeah, so hearing that, I was like, man, I'm just doing this all wrong. She's been forgiven. Why can't I? And it wasn't an overnight thing. I still struggled. There were still months and months of me struggling with this. And especially when it moved towards, I feel like I want to marry this girl. When that feeling hit, that's when it really kind of ramped up a little bit in me. I fought it a lot, but we still had these conversations of it was almost like I just had to get it all out. And unfortunately, like I said, we got off the phone crying a lot, but, so that was all happening out there when I was in LA. And then the other thing that was happening in LA, which ultimately led to me leaving, the first time God kicked me out, the second time I left on my own, I had the question in my mind, and it stemmed from Emily, because she said the only reason she listened to what I had to say is because my life reflected it. I did what I said. I wasn't sitting there getting wasted with everybody and then trying to tell her about Jesus.
Sure.
Like, there was a difference that she noticed in me. Again, I'm not a perfect person. Don't hear me saying that by any stretch of the imagination. I have messed up big time throughout my life, but overall, I try to live a life that matches what I say. And so she said the only reason she listened to me is because of that. So in LA, man, I just started having these thoughts of like, the one question that kept ringing in my head was, can I be the believer I want to be and be the successful actor that I want to be? Can I sacrifice everything that I believe just for a role in a film and still be proud of the work that I'm doing? And the thought was, I can separate Britt, the actor, from Britt, the believer, Britt, the person, because I get that it's a film, but can like a 15-year-old boy in Oklahoma somewhere separate the two? You know, can I do a film where I'm doing all this stuff that I personally, in my personal life, don't agree with, but it's in a movie, and then sit on Good Morning America and tell people that I'm a follower of Christ? And how does that work? How does that fit together? And the more I thought through it and the more I wrestled with it, the more it just came to, I can't. I don't believe it's possible. You know, I look at, and this I know could cause a bunch of controversy with people in the acting world, but I look at like a Denzel Washington. Believers love to point to him as a solid Christian guy, but look at the films he does. Yeah. I'm sorry. I can't. I get as an actor, you can separate the two, but ultimately at the end of the day, you can't. You can't, in my personal opinion, you can't separate the two. If he's truly a believer and wants to use his talents for God, then do it. I get that it's fun to experiment and to be other characters, but do that with inside of a Christian film that tells a story. Training Day doesn't have any redemptive qualities to it.
No.
But it's just trash from start to finish. I saw the film, so I know I'm talking about trash as something I watched. So sure. I know a little hypocritical on my side, but my ultimate point is I reached a point to where I couldn't reconcile those two. And so I packed everything up, drove back across the country for the second time. Well, actually the fourth time, but second time leaving LA. Came back, and then over the next few months, you know, Emily and I dated for a while, and we ended up getting engaged and getting married. And to kind of wrap it all up a little tighter for everybody, what I've realized over the past, we've been married for 9 years as of a couple days ago. What I've realized and what God has really, really taught me and shown me is that my safety in LA was a spiritual safety. I was not spiritually ready to handle that city. As much as I thought I would have been focused and able to handle anything that was thrown at me, I was not mature as a believer, even though I grew up in the faith. Even though I grew up around it all the time, it was just something that I had in my life. I never really studied. I never really learned. I never really grew like I should have. And so the safety was a spiritual safety. And that's been revealed to me time and time again as to why I left. So now Emily and I are married, 2 kids. We got a third on the way in a couple months.
Congratulations. First girl. Right?
Yes. 2 boys and now a girl on the way. Yeah. And you, Chad, you have 3 girls.
3 girls. Yeah.
I'm going to need some pointers. Maybe we can do a podcast on how to raise girls.
There's no answers to that. There's no answers.
Yeah. So coming back from LA, ultimately ended up at Life Fellowship. The reason why I ended up ultimately doing the production manager is because I just let go of all of my plans, and I wasn't apathetic, and I'm going to be lazy and sit on the couch until somebody knocks on the door with a job. That's not what I'm saying here at all. But I did let go and stop trying to force what career I had in my head, and I just said, God, you lead me where you want me to go. So I started doing production work in the professional world outside of the church, behind the camera. I did a few things there. And then that gave me a little bit of training and knowledge just on how production works in general. And it just naturally kind of flowed into the church realm. And I've loved every second of it. You know, it's hard. You're in ministry. The work is hard. The hours are long sometimes. It's not all glamorous, probably isn't the right word for ministry. but a lot of people think, hey, you only work on Sunday. So what?
Well, let me ask you about that because, I have a similar story as far as the waves of life and different things that I've done and focused on. Like as a young boy, I wanted to be a G.I. Joe. And then, for the next 5 to 10 years of my life, it was all about baseball. And I was obsessed with baseball. And then just one day things changed and it became music. And for the next decade of my life or more, I was a musician. And I still have those elements. That's who I am. And in that particular season, It's fine. It's okay to pursue those passions, but the passions change. Maybe it's maturity, maybe it's lack of opportunity or whatever. But in the creative, and I can speak to this as well as a musician. There's Brian and I were talking about earlier today is the Pareto distribution, which basically is things are more likely to fail than to succeed on whole. So if you write a book, there's a higher likelihood that book is never going to be read, maybe one or two. But the people who have successful books, there's a small margin, and they're the most successful books by and large, way above and beyond anything else. And with the creative world, I think about that a lot with whether it's music or art. There's very, very few musicians, actors that the pool of actors is actually pretty small in comparison to the people that we can name off and we consider really great actors. And I've even noticed in commercials now, you'll have a famous actor doing a voiceover, and it's like, well, instead of a voiceover person. So, but in regards to that, those seasons of life, you kind of converted into the production role, which I see a maturity because you learn on both sides of the camera, quality, production, what does a good shot look like? You might be in the shot, you might be looking at the shot, but we see people like, lots of producers and directors that were okay actors and they ended up being fantastic. Same with sports, you get an average soccer player, an amazing coach, or sometimes you get the opposite. You get an amazing player and a horrible owner, which we may or may not experience here in Charlotte with some of our teams. But in that regard, so with the balance of production at a church, I don't think there's a correct answer to this, but I did want to bring this up and get your opinion on this. Brian and I were talking the other day about production at a church and how it can go too far and it can not go far enough. There tends to be a devil's advocate on both sides where, I'm never going to go to a church with a smoke machine. And then there are people that would never go to a church that doesn't have a smoke machine. And so there's kind of a balance. And I do think that people, going back to the Denzel Washington thing, there are different people for different things. There are some people that have different capacity to reach different people, whether it's in the ministry or businesses or whatever. There's somebody for everybody for some things. But what is a healthy balance? And I personally think we do a pretty decent job here at Life Fellowship here. So as far as having production to where it's not a distracting service, you can focus, because I know it's difficult to be in a worship experience where there's kids running around and stuff falling and somebody's making hot dogs in the back of the room. It's just sort of a.
I think you're talking about a circus.
Yeah,
hot dogs at church.
Yeah, and I've been there as a guitar player. I've definitely been at the youth rally where they're literally cooking and boiling hot dogs in the back of the room, and like you're trying to create a
pizza blast, right?
Yeah, a pizza blast. So you'll have these events like that, but then on the other hand, I look at it like a nice restaurant. They dim the lights. There's an experience. The table's set. It prepares you for this fantastic meal. And I kind of look at production in a church sense as that, like, okay, we're setting the table and making the, and some people would look at that as falsifying the experience. You're manufacturing, I think is what a lot of people say, manufacturing the experience. So speak to that a little bit about how you try to find that balance here, and what are some things that you do to create that balance where it's healthy, doesn't go over the top, but also because, again, in my opinion, life has a great balance of those things. Well,
a lot of churches either go heavy one way or the other. They're either really heavy arts and show. I'll use air quotes for show. You can't see that on a podcast either, but or they go all gospel, no arts. So arts, no gospel, gospel, no arts. So it is hard to find a church that marries the two of those really well. And like you said, Chad, Life Fellowship does a great job of doing that, in my opinion. As a production manager, I mean, I can sit and ask, is any of this necessary? No, it's not. To spread the gospel, none of what we have here is necessary. At the same time, do we want to kind of be culturally relevant? We do. So what is relevant? Well, cool, trendy songs are relevant. Lights are relevant. I mean, fog in certain circumstances is relevant. So you're seeing what the culture does to appease the general audience coming into the church, and it's come into the church for a long time. But I think everything that's used has to have a purpose. There needs to be a purpose behind it. You don't need lights flashing just for the sake of lights flashing. You know, is there a part in the song where it makes sense? Is there, you know, something to a drama that's being done on stage possibly that necessitates the use of the technology and the lights? So I think if you run everything through the gospel, and the gospel's clearly presented through song, through teaching, through drama, through whatever your church does, as long as that's clearly presented and the technology accentuates that, then there's a place for it.
Well, I think it's important. Culture is important in a lot of ways. In particular, you know, if you are the pastor of a church in another country, it wouldn't be unusual to have, you know, a small beat up motorcycle. If you live where we do, it's going to be different than if you lived in LA. So there's some cultural sort of expectation, you know, again, to use the restaurant. We expect you go into a restaurant and the bathrooms are clean and the food is prepared in a certain way. We kind of have an expectation in the United States, and even in some cities and countries, it's different. So there is a balance there, and I think it's sad to see people take it to the extreme. I know I've had people say, oh gosh, you know, this church is unlimited money. They got all this nice equipment sitting in a closet that's, you know, that unopened, and it's, you know, it's that is a shame. I've seen it myself. And then knowing that there are other churches that they don't even have a way to tune their guitar, and they have fantastic worship service. So, I agree, like God can see through some of that stuff, but from, you know, a balancing standpoint, you're never going to make everybody happy, but I think, especially at this church, we value balance, not trying to make everybody happy, but being biblically sound and all that stuff. But one thing I did want to bring up as well, which kind of ties into this, one of the things I really liked about Life Charlotte when I first came here was they were pretty transparent with the budget. And I know you and I both have walked through the Dave Ramsey program. Tell us a little bit about that and your story.
Well, so I will say quickly about a church, and I've told our team this as well. You do have to look at percentages. So is the church spending 50% of their budget on technology and gear and 5% on missions, or are they spending 5% on technology and gear and 50% on missions? And that makes a big difference. And it makes a big difference on the amount of money that's coming in. 5% of $100,000 budget a year is way different than 5% of a $5 million budget a year.
Yeah.
So some churches just have the resources to be able to pour in and create, a budget for technology that looks extravagant, but when you dig into the percentages, I mean, I know Life Fellowship, for one, is heavy into missions, local and international. So here we are, we have a church that's giving more money, I would say, to missions than they are to technology, even though the eye sees a bunch of nice lights and gear and thinks, oh man, this is all this church cares about, which I don't think is the case. And I'll also say, I tell my teams as well, the gear's here, let's use it. Let's be good stewards of what's already purchased and use it to the best of its ability. We shouldn't have, however much the lights cost and then only turn one on because people don't like bright lights on a Sunday morning. We have them. They've been paid for. They're installed. Let's use them to bring glory to God, not just bring glory to us, or not just have them sitting there going to waste, even though they've been paid for.
Right.
So there's a little sidetrack. Sorry. So you asked about Ramsey.
No,
You're asking about. Do you want to dig into that a little bit? Was that where your question was heading? Or?
You don't have to get necessarily detailed with it, but I know that
budget. So we make.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think the thing that's interesting to me about the Dave Ramsey thing, and the reason I wanted to bring that up in particular with you, is there's a lot of people that there's something that changes, and for the rest of their life, they change. And that's one of the things I think with Dave Ramsey that you're one of the people I can look to and say, oh, he's got a story and it changed. And again, you don't have to share the whole story, but what is your kind of experience? What was that, and how did it change for you? What was the kind of defining moment?
Man, we're still working hard to make that happen. And I'm saying all that, and I'm hesitant to say that in a way because our anniversary was on Wednesday, 2 days ago, whatever the 30th was. Yeah, 2 days ago. And we spent part of our anniversary writing out a list of all of the things we wanted to see happen over the next 5 years and why we were going to see them and why we wanted to make it happen.
Cool.
We kind of use that as like a reset day in a way, because we've been doing the Ramsey thing for a little over maybe close to 2 years now. And the one thing that snapped was we went on a ski trip with my cousins, and literally everything that we purchased that weekend was on a credit card. Mm-hmm. Everything. Gas on the way up there, food to eat out, renting snowboards, buying clothes to go up there. I mean, 100% of what we did was on the credit card. And we had been doing it, and we bought into the illusion of we'll just pay it off at the end of the month. Mm-hmm. Well, then all of a sudden, 1 month, you don't have 400 of the 1,000 you put on there. So we'll just pay that off next month. Mm-hmm. And then it just, so driving home, on the way home from that, I said, I've always kind of made fun of the whole Ramsey thing because I've always subscribed to God's going to provide for us no matter what. So let's just, we don't have to worry about saving a ton of money. He's going to provide no matter what. I still believe that. I still do believe God will provide no matter what, but I don't think us having $20,000 worth of debt is a smart thing to do, because now we're not in a position to help other people. We're not in a position, and the Bible talks a lot about having debt. You're a slave to the lender. Mm-hmm. And so driving home, I was like, man, I know I've kind of talked down about Ramsey in the past, but I said, I've looked into it a little more. I've heard some people talking about it, and I said, this trip kind of just made me sick. I didn't enjoy it as much because I know we're going home with a lot of money that we're going to have to pay later. Like the 2 days snowboarding were fun, but it wasn't worth all of this. And so at that point, we decided we were going to dig into it. So we got the classes, Financial Peace University, went through them all, started making our budget. We've fallen off the wagon a few times, a few months here and there where we just blow our budget completely out of the water because we get selfish and want to go out and eat or want to go do something else. But we always find a way to hop back on. And we've gone without a few things. But our main focus and our main why eventually comes down to, we want to retire and be able to not work when we get a little older. But man, we got 3 kids, 1 on the way, 2 kids, 1 on the way. So 3 total. But I want them to be able to grow up, not to be spoiled, not ever have to work a day in their life, because I expect them to work. Yeah. I want them to respect money, to care about money. And I want to be able to look at them, whether when they graduate college or when they get married, and say, me and your mother have struggled, we've sacrificed, we've put back, we've saved, we've invested, so that we can either hand you a house free and clear, hand you a car free and clear, here's money for a down payment, whatever. Again, not to spoil them, but so that they can sit back in their life and say, we can do anything we want from this point forward without money being an issue. Yeah. And what I mean by that is I don't want them to have to think or even look at their kids one day and say, hey, you can't go on that mission trip because we don't have $1,000 to do that. Sure. Hey, there's a single mom in your class, and we know she needs a car, but we're in debt and we can't do it. Yeah. That's what I want my kids to be able to do. I don't want them to have any debt so that they can go and spread the gospel even further. And if that means me and Emily have to struggle and go without going out to dinner one night right now, knowing that we're setting them up in the future, and Ramsey always says, change your family tree. That's what we're doing. That's our ultimate why. And so there's steps to get to that we have to go through. Saving money for, a new car because we're not going to go get a car payment, or saving money for a new house because we're not going to go get a new mortgage, or it delays pleasure right now, which we're having to do. We struggle with that sometimes. Again, like I said, we jump the gun a few times and go do something we really want to do and look back on it, which is funny. You always look, which sin's that way too. You look back on it after the fact and you're like, gosh, that wasn't worth it.
Well, and it goes back to balance too with, what do you need to do or want to do now with your life? And, I've heard the argument too about, well, what if I die tomorrow and I never had that car I always wanted or never went to Disney and things like that. So I can see that, anything can happen. But I think it's wise to plan. And again, like from the production standpoint of the church here and just the church, the way they handle that, like if the church wasn't wise with their money, we wouldn't be able to do those ministries, wouldn't be able to reach out. There is a balance, of course, on the other end of the extreme. I've known pastors that have huge mansions and people get frustrated about it. But then the local pastor down the street with 100 people, in percentage wise, they're taking more home than the big guy, and so there's a balance there. And we've all seen some of the guys getting on the private jets, and it's become satire now where people make fun of it, and that's sort of sad to me. But again, trying to find the balance, fitting in the culture. Being efficient, because at the same time, there are decisions, I think, financially, production, all those decisions where you say, okay, this works for us. This piece of equipment is worth the money. It's going to have a bigger impact. And sometimes it's hard to see the future of what that particular cost is going to be. Whether it's a podcast studio, whether it's a, new lights or whatever it might be. Yeah,
that's kind of, that's the, and I can't remember who said it, but begin with the end in mind.
Yep.
That's what we're doing with our budget. And that's what, the church has to do when building a production studio or whatever it is. You need to know what that end goal is. And then you just acquire those pieces along the way to ultimately hit that end vision. Everybody that earns a paycheck, that's a believer, it's God's money. They're just trying to be good stewards, or should be good stewards of it. I work at a church. And so that weighs heavier on me, because I know I'm receiving tithes and offerings from the congregation that is God's money.
Sure.
That I do know and I don't take lightly. It could be money that could be going to some kid who's hungry in Africa. And so the work that I put in, I try to be as diligent as possible, work as hard as possible, work extra hours if needed to make sure that the gospel is the main focus and what's spread through everything that we do. As you know, Chad, we have, our mission statement, the first 3 words, plan, prepare, present. That's what we do here. There's a lot of planning that goes on, a lot of preparation that goes on so that we can present a cohesive story on a Sunday morning. And in all of the songs that we do and the story that's told, we always try to fit in some type of, and Jason's fantastic at planning this, something that deals with death, burial, resurrection, Christ's birth, if we can, creation of the world. Just, we try to tell a gospel message every Sunday, and then that facilitates the pastor and whatever his message is as well.
Awesome.
Cool. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, Britt.
Oh, no problem.
That was a really cool story. So we'll go ahead and wrap things up. At some point, we'll have some social links. Maybe the podcast can have a Twitter account or something. But we'll post it on the website, that sort of stuff. But we will have more episodes in the future, so keep tuning in.